And we're back on Chicano Tube. I appreciate you for tuning in. It's Friday night. We got a very, very special guest. Before I introduce him, though, you know what I got to do. I got to go through the formalities. You guys already know me, Raza, mi gente. Gracias, all the day oneers that have been here supporting since day one, since the new rebranding of the channel and taking this channel as far as La Voz de la Raza can go. All the day oneers, also the members only. Some people ask me, what is the members only? Okay, well, it's the tough guy stories. Let's just call them the tough guy stories. We don't put those out in publico. Okay, I just know. I see. No, I'm a little bit more old school than that. That's the members only. If you wanted to see those videos, the gritty, the grimy, and all that, you can go ahead and subscribe over to the members only. Don't forget to pass by the merch store as well. I want to remind the people that the merch store is nonprofit. It's 100% for the people. So it's just to get the brand out there. It's to get the message out there, I guess. Because really, I got a vision. I got a vision for this that's way bigger than just where it's starting out to be. It's gonna get. I believe it's gonna get to a point where it's gonna be more than just Mike. It's gonna be a movement of gente. And then when it's a movement of gente, pues you're not going to be able to stop the people. So, gracias a all that. I want to introduce my special guest that I got in the casa right here, waywardson360. Now, that's one of the social media handles. Correct me if I'm wrong, my brother, if I should say otro nombre, tú dime.
No, that's what I go by on the on TikTok. That's the song, the canción, "Carry On My Wayward Son" by Kansas. I'm old school, so I like old school classic rock.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, classic rock. It's funny you mentioned that. Classic rock is what's pumping in my ears when I'm lifting weights.
Yeah, I like that old school stuff. Pretty much anything old school, man. Old school R&B, old school classic rock, man. Just a lot of also rancheras, old school. I like my Grupo Maz and Little Joe, La Familia, and stuff like that. I like anything old school.
It's my dad has, and I have it now in my possession, a cassette tape, and ahí tenía Dueto Azteca, Jorge Negrete, Infante, Aguilar, that generation of music. He also did have Sanchez, Ayala, and all, and the newer kind of music. But
Yeah,
no, I appreciate you, my brother.
thank you. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, you know what? Here, just introducing you to the channel, we have three pillars that this canal stands on. All my day oneers, which are in the comment section now, they know the three pillars off the top of their heads is Dios, familia, y cultura. I stand on that. It's immovable. Nadie me puede mover that as a foundation. I don't have my parents anymore. I don't have any more of my grandparents. Soy Chicano. By definition, I believe nomás porque I have 100% Mexican blood and I'm first generation Mexican American. So yo nací aquí, pero mis papás no nacieron aquí, but I'm first generation. So I'm Chicano. And those pillars, I feel it like on me to continue that, to give people identity, because I believe we're in a time right now where there's no identity and they're getting it from their laptops. They're getting it from social media. Y los niños have 10 color different hair and need safe spaces. And the moms can't even think about them scraping a knee or bruising it porque that's the
Yeah.
end of the world a las mamás nowadays. Dios, familia, y cultura. I just wanted to put that. Also, raza unity is another pillar. Real quick, before I turn it over to you, because there's some questions that were coming in when I posted that you were coming on. Y también hablo como un perico a lot, so my bad. Raza unity is another pillar of mine. I just want to let you know as well. What does a raza unity mean? I'm in California. I'm in Califas. Over here, tú ya sabes, it's almost still in the old school cuando hay chingazos in the streets and shit like that. So one thing I'm a proponent from now being the age I am in my 40s is, you know what? We could unite together, because if you look at their familia, their abuelita looks like your abuelita. And
Yep.
they're exactly, and their mama, tu mama, and you're getting the same chancla that they got chancla back in the day. So I'm also a proponent for raza unity. Let me ask you this, carnal, wayward son. I know what that means. It has a like a rebellion undertone to it. How did you come about that one?
Well, because the song, it speaks to me, man. If you listen to the words, it's like "Carry On My Wayward Son." It's talking about going through a struggle. and that, you know, once you reach the other side, there's another side of the struggle, and you're gonna reach that other side. And it's a beautiful song to me, and because it speaks to me like a lot of old school songs. You know, it's just telling you, man, just keep your head down and keep, you know, keep moving, man.
That's right. No, it is. It's a wonderful song, and it's a word wayward, right? Because
Yeah.
it's that word means it's like rebellious, and that's like
Well,
you said you like classic rock. That's an undertone to a lot of classic rock, right?
yeah, and the reason I chose that is because at one time I was that wayward son, you know, like the prodigal son. I went off in a certain direction, man. I fell, and I had to pick myself up and dust myself off, you know, and just carry on.
That's right. I appreciate you for coming on. Vamos a estar aquí una hora, gente. Hit that like, hit that subscribe. And also, you could find him at the handle that's down there. Gracias, Can't Stop Via. waywardson360. That's those social media handles. Carnal, let me ask you this. Right now it's September. So right here in the United States, it's Mexican Heritage Month, but they call it Hispanic or they call it this or that. Should Chicanos be more, in your opinion, should Chicanos be more in tune with Mexican heritage, American estilo? What do you think about that? Or is it dos patrias? So embrace two, if you even have that ideology or not.
No, well, see, that's pretty much my entire platform. See, I didn't intend to make content on TikTok. I pretty much just got on there to watch stupid videos, comedy videos, because I like comedy. I grew up with old school comedians, and like Richard Pryor, and you know, and Red Fox,
That's right.
stand up stuff like that, man. But so I got on here. I saw a video on YouTube of a comedy video on TikTok, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna check out TikTok because I thought, well, you know, it's like YouTube, so they show videos, so I'm gonna get on there. And my first video was a response to somebody being racist to our people because I was at work, and if you scroll down through my content, you see I was at work, and they were telling Mexicans to go back to Mexico, and this is from another Mexicana was telling, you know, a Chicana, telling somebody from Mexico to go back, you know, to go back to Mexico. And man, that just hit me hard because I used to be that Chicano. I used to be the type of Chicano because, you know, back when, man, we used to always have pleito with la gente del otro lado. We used to, I mean, that's
Right.
just what it was. You know, it got to the point that I used to wear a T-shirt that said on the back, Chicano, y que. That's how I was living. Because, you know, people from Mexico would come over here and tell me, pues, no hablas en español, you don't speak Spanish, what kind of Mexican are you? Eh, and it used to be that, you know, back and forth because I was, you know, down with the Chicano onda. And, you know, because my older brothers were down with the Chicano movement. And so I used to gravitate towards that onda and we'd have this pleito. So when it comes from, you know, celebrating or being uh, committed to one or the other. They're both nationalities, and that's what a lot of people don't understand, or a lot of people
Okay.
don't take into mind. Mexican, you know, by definition, is a nationality, not an ethnicity. American, by definition, is a nationality, not an ethnicity. So, I mean, you wanna celebrate Mexican health, you know, culture. That's my culture. I'm gonna celebrate that, you know. But at the same time, if you know, you can be happy to be part of the United States. You know, that's you. You're chasing your dreams. More power to you. My whole thing is, you can do that without selling out, man. You don't have to turn your back on your roots and where you came from in order to chase that dream. That's all I'm saying with my videos and with what I'm trying to get across to people. I'm not telling you to turn your back on the fact that you were born and raised here in America, or that you feel you know, like some kind of attachment to the United States. I'm not saying turn your back on that. Pursue your dreams, but not at the expense of your roots, man. Who you are and
That's
where you
right.
came.
Carnal, I said that the other day. I was responding to some, and it's we're in the internet age now. One comment, one video can reach the masses. Obviously, you know that some of your videos have 4 million views, 2 million views. I don't even know if you pay attention to that or not.
Not really.
Um,
I get told that though, but I don't really, because I'm
right.
making while I'm at work. I'm making them on the fly, or I'm making them in my truck on the way to work or as I get home. And it's not, I that very first video that I made, and it kind of rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but it also spoke to others because what I the main point of that first video is I told them that the only difference between a foreigner and somebody who's indigenous to this land is you either met the boat or you came over on it. And that spoke to some people and rubbed others the wrong way. And I just made that video, put it out there, went back to work, didn't pay no attention to it. And 2 days later, I got back on uh, TikTok, and I seen that I had picked up like 6,000 followers, and the video had about at that time about 30 something thousand likes. And I didn't know that that wasn't the way it usually happens because it wasn't my thing. You know, I just made a quick video response, and so the results of that video and the things that people were saying, it just got me interested in like, hey, wait a minute, you don't know some of the things that I mentioned because a lot of the things that I mentioned were palabras that we thought were Mexican, but are actually indigenous foods that we eat that we thought that I've always thought and was grown up to believe were Mexican, but were actually indigenous. Things that we use like tocomal, mocajete, those aren't Mexican. Those aren't Spanish. Those are indigenous utensils. Ilote, pozole, atole. Those aren't Mexican. Those are indigenous foods. You know, and indigenous words that we say. You know, cacahuate, guajolote. All of these words were indigenous words, but I've always believed them to be Mexican, and they weren't.
And you cause a lot of people to think, o sea, Wayward say he's humble the way he says it. You know, he just makes a video on his break, uploads it, doesn't know that it's shooting to the masses, but it's because you're pulling out information that they haven't heard. Like when I heard your video, El Plan de San Diego, and other things. O sea, you're passing down history, which we appreciate, and that's one thing that I love about the internet is that that kind of information can go out there as well. O sea, it's some people call it YouTube University or you know or TikTok or all that, but I appreciate you because yes, like you said, I had seen some videos and some comments. Again, it's sometimes I call it YouTube Landia. O sea, it's a world away from a world, and they'll comment and they'll say everything he says is driven by hate when you're really putting information out there and letting the people decide it's neither here, it's neither there. This is what it is.
That's exactly my point because see, a lot of people don't understand. There's a difference between hate and righteous anger. Now you have every right to be angry by the things that happen to you, and but I get accused of putting out hate. That's why I made the last video I made, which got taken down at 58,000 likes, because all I did in that entire video, the first half of that video, was speak facts, one fact after another, historical facts that have either been lost or hidden, and they didn't like what I said, even though it was, and I said in my video, I'm not commenting on that. I'm not giving my opinion. I'll give my opinion at the end of the video, but everything that I'm stating is simply fact. You can look it up, you can research it, it's simply fact. But a lot of people don't want to hear the facts, not the true history of the United States. And I get accused often of living in the past. And my question to anybody who thinks I'm stuck in the past is this: tell me, when did colonization end in the United States? If you can tell me when colonization ended in the United States, then I'll agree I'm living in the past. But you know what? I woke up today in an occupied territory. Now, you can call it what you want to, but Turtle Island, by any other name, is still Turtle Island. Anahuac, by any other name, is still Anahuac. And that's what I believe.
And I want to make sure it didn't go over the gente's head. And I know it didn't because I have a lot of critical thinkers. Is something that I push on this canal, carnal. Critical thinking. I need my subscribers do the research. Ya sabemos in the day and age that we are right now, las noticias ni son noticias. It's just an agenda. It's just someone pushing it. And I guess it's the initial inception of all these electronics were propaganda anyways. And so that's my gente no, and they're critical thinkers. I just don't want them to. So in the educational system, then in the United States, how much, if you were to put a percentage, say that is skewed or has a narrative to it, is the whole thing just what they want you to hear, believe, and think and see?
It's exactly that. And see, but here's the thing. I grew up in that system. I was raised in that system. I tried to excel in that system.
Oh, wait a second, real quick. But I'm not talking about math, science, things that are
No,
what they are. I'm not talking
no.
about those things. I'm talking
And
history.
yes, and all of those things that I was taught, once I started to learn otherwise, when the floodgates opened for me, was other old school Chicanos who knew the history, who had the books, who had the knowledge and was willing to share that with me. But see, I was that Chicano that had grown up so indoctrinated that I didn't want to hear it. I actually spoke against them. No, but estás pendejo. That ain't, man, that ain't what it is. That you don't know what you're talking about. No, but este vato, mira. You know, I used to be that Chicano. The same people that jump into my comments and criticize me, I try to empathize with that because I used to be that person jumping at these other dudes who try to show me the way. And but once I started seeing and started reading some actual books that weren't written by this gente, indigenous books written by indigenous people, by Chicanos in the Chicano movement, and started to actually listen to what was going on. And once I seen one lie and started looking at it through a critical eye, then I started seeing lie after lie after lie after lie. And I knew that the history that I was being taught was not the history as it actually was. It was the history as they wanted me to believe. And I believed it. I bought into it.
Wow. No, I believe it. It's kind of like if someone that didn't grow up in El Barrio, we're painting a different picture of it, and you grew up there, right? You're the one
Yeah,
that grew up with in the barrio around roaches and pobreza and whatever, and you're like, hey, that's not that's what you're saying is wrong. I know because I lived there. O sea, your experiences didn't match what the professor was teaching.
exactly. That's exactly what took place with me because for a long period of time I only heard and saw one side of the picture. Now, growing up, they always told you that there's two sides to the story, but we never got that other side. All we got was that one side, the side that they wanted you to believe. And I took that for what it was. I took it to the point that I was so pro United States, pro. I joined the army at age 17. I went and I had to wait until I was 18 to actually go through basic training in AIT. I joined the army out of patriotism, not because I was trying to run away from, the barrio, which, I should have been doing at that time because of the things that was going on in my life at that time. But I joined out of patriotism because I actually believed, I was that dude, pledge, standing up to pledge allegiance. And it wasn't until later in life that I understood that when I started listening to my jefito and my grandfather, their stories, their history, not something that was written in a book in somebody else's book to indoctrinate me. I'm talking about lived experiences of my jefito who fought in World War II, who fought in a segregated unit in World War II, and who came back to the United States after risking his life to serve this country. And there were certain parts of town that he couldn't live in. There were certain restaurants he couldn't go to. There were certain movie theaters. Here in this barrio, here in this where I live right now, there's two movie theaters. Now, a lot of people don't know the history of those movie theaters, but one of them era para los gabachos, and the other one was for the raza, because you couldn't even congregate together, and that's just what it was. And when he starts telling me this history, but I'm like, pero you fought for this country. You went and you did what you did, and killed and risked your life in defense of it. And this is how they treated you. And he's like, Simon. He started, because he didn't used to talk to me about it, but then when he started opening up and telling me all these things, and then my jefito, my abuelito, he was born in 1898, not 1898. My abuelito, he passed away in 1985 at the age of what, 89, 90, right in there. He started telling me about all the things that he saw when he was here. He crossed the border in 1918. So he saw a lot here. He saw a lot here. And when he started telling me the firsthand knowledge, not things that people have written in books in order to domesticate your mind, but things that actually happened to him and that he experienced. And it started to open up my eyes, man. I started to finally see that all these things that I've been taught and been led to believe, not all of them were true.
That's right. No, yeah, that's history. That history. It reminds me of a one time I visited the last uncle. My dad had four brothers, born in Michoacan. They're from Cualcoman, Michoacan. The last brother that was living, still was living in Santa Rosa up here. That's like north of San Francisco. He was telling me history of grandfather, great grand. I don't know how he had the memory, but he was able to give me like 4 or 5 generations. I sat down, I started writing everything down. I said, I gotta write this down. I gotta pass this on. Again, I got into. I did a video. I did a reaction because there was someone Mexicano, 100%. Even though, of course, he's como Chicano como yo, but he was saying there's no need to teach the kids Spanish anymore. And I reacted to that video and I said, wait a second. I feel like my parents will be rolling in their grave. My grandparents rolling in their grave. Sí estoy de aquí. I mean, as far as a Chicano, dos banderas, I said, soy de aquí, no miras el estado unicense in me. But I feel like if I didn't teach them Spanish, I'd be totally turning my back on Mexico, cultura. And I've only lost my mother for 1 year. And I still go visit my mother at the cemetery and cry like a baby over her tombstone. And I feel like I'd be letting her down also if I didn't do that. But then he had the other opinion, like, for what? We're in this country. Any thoughts on that?
Well, see, that's the hard thing because growing up in the Chicano, because I made a video about Chicanismo, and growing up with veteranos of the Chicano movement, I understood because of the pleito that we had with Mexicans from Mexico. Like I mentioned earlier, when they told me that what kind of Mexican are you? You don't speak Spanish. My response to that was always the same. Before Hernan Cortez, none of my people spoke Spanish. And that's what I would respond because it is truth. And part of the Chicano movement, it wasn't, I mean, it was a social movement, it was an anti-assimilation movement. It was a civil rights movement. There was plenty of things that made up the Chicano movement, but one of those things was the anti-assimilation movement, that we were trying to find our way in a self-identity in a world where I'm sure you're 40 something. I'm 58. I just turned 58 about 3 weeks ago. And back then, you've heard the same, ni de aquí ni de allá. And that's what one of the bases of the Chicano movement was. We weren't accepted by the white people here, but neither was we accepted by Mexicans from Mexico. So we were lost. Who are we? One of the main slogans of the Chicano movement was "We are Aslan," because they started going back into their history, not the history of Mexico when we crossed the border, because the history of Mexico isn't our true history, isn't our roots. That's the point of our uprooting. You go further back than that, before the conquest, before Hernan Cortez. So that's why when they came up with the slogan, "We are Aslan," because they understood that it goes further back than that. So Mexican culture as it is, like I said, a lot of people, when we're thinking Mexican culture, we're thinking a mixture of Spanish and indigenous. So yeah, that's ours. That's ours. It was ours. Now we've been led to believe it's something different, but I'm going to tell you something. Until I was 32 years old before I learned that Mexican wasn't a race. I thought up until that point, I thought Mexican were like Japanese from Japan, Mexicans from Mexico. That the whole time I believed that all Mexicans came from Mexico because that was a race. I didn't understand that there are 68 indigenous peoples in Mexico, 68 different nations, pueblos. And but today you can take 100 Mexicans. I can line up 100 Mexicans born and raised here in the United States, second, third, fourth generation, and ask them, what is your ethnicity? And they're going to say Mexican. They're going to say Hispanic, or they're going to say Latino. They're not going to say Zapotec. They're not going to say Mixtec. They're not going to say Yaqui. They're not going to say any of these things. Puropecha. They're not going to say Taramajura because they don't know which nation they are. They don't know the fact that they're indigenous. They're not just Mexicans from Mexico. We have indigenous blood running through our veins. 95% of Mexicans in Mexico have some degree of indigenous blood, but most people don't know.
You just reminded me of mi abuelita, 4 feet tall, morena, morena, morena. But and her beautiful braids. I think they would braid her hair, almost hit the floor, cocinando tortillas. That's indigenous blood. But and mi abuelito now on the other side of the coin from Jalisco. This is on my mom's side. They're from both of them from Jalisco. As white as a ghost,
Yep.
as white as a ghost. I think he had color eyes because my mom had like almendra, green hazel eyes. That's the mixture. But what you're talking about is going further because it seems like history for Mexicanos in a lot of information, a lot of videos seems to start right there at the Inquisition
Yep.
and doesn't go too much farther back. So
No.
in essence, you're saying Spanish is not a Mexicano's true language.
No, it is not. It not only is Spanish that's Español is Española, Spain. Now, although we have DNA from the Spaniard, and I know that this rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but I'm going to say it here because I'm not going to shy away from what I believe. I recognize the Spanish blood that runs through my veins, but I recognize it as the stain on my existence that it is. Because my people existed before Spain came. And that was a conquest, that was rape, that was murder, that was subjugation, that was colonization. I recognize it for what it is. Our last names, and this is going to rub a lot of people the wrong way too, who have their name plastered on the back of their truck or the back of their car. Gonzalez, Hernandez, Garcia, Lopez, for all intents and purposes, those are slave names. Now, a lot of people might think, oh, well, he's too this, that, or the other. He's too I don't know how to say it. He's too radical. He's too radical for my beliefs. It's truth. Whether you want to accept it or not, that's on you. But that is the truth. Our names didn't come. There was no Lopez, Hernandez, Gonzalez before the conquest here. There just wasn't. That wasn't the names that were here. Those were brought to us, just like the Spanish language, just like Roman Catholicism. That see, when we think Mexico, we think Spanish. That's a colonized language. We think these last names, Gonzalez, Lopez, those are colonized slave names. When we think Roman Catholicism, that's a foreign religion. None of those things are indigenous to these lands. None of them.
I'm just saying, right now, you give me a blow right now. Oh man, it knocked the wind out of me right now. I was thinking, y todos los chicanos, and I'm one of them, que tienen esos apellidos tattooed on their backs.
Well,
Again, this is critical thinking, gente. We're gonna make you think. I like to be provoked into thinking. I hate, and I've never, well, at least at the adult level, I tell a lot of the people, carnal, that I've never been groomed. I've never been, I mean, as far as the education, okay, that's another topic, but I'm talking about coming from a political standpoint or anything. I was just a Chicano. I grew up in the barrio. My members only, okay, they know the true, and the whole story from A to Z and everything that's happened. And then here I am looking at El Mundo donde está ahorita, and then the information age that we're in, we want to learn more and more and more. You just blew me away right now. And also it was like a little blow to the stomach and knocked my wind out. I'm like, aquí tengo and el apellido. And now I'm thinking, do I have a foreign last name on my back?
and see, but that's exactly what you're thinking, exactly what you have, what you're having to contemplate is the exact same things I had to contemplate 35 years ago. I had to go through that same thing because I was that same dude that had my name on the back of his t-shirt also. Sabes como te digo, on that wife beater. I used to have my placazo there. And that's, because, hey, I'm proud of this name. And it wasn't until later down the road that I understood that, wait a minute, man, I'm not from Spain. Because what a lot of people don't understand, because they'll say, oh, but you have Spanish blood. Your lineage comes from your mom, not your father. Although you will carry DNA from your father, your lineage comes from your mom by way of mitochondrial DNA that only a woman can pass down. You have mitochondrial DNA, but your jefito cannot pass that down. Only your mother, hence the word motherland. That comes from your mother. Your lineage comes from your mother. You can trace your family tree through your father and your DNA through there. Yeah, that's fine, but your lineage comes from your mother by way of mitochondrial DNA. So that her last name, it wasn't a boat full of women they came across, con Hernan Cortez. They were conquistadors. They were Spaniards. They were men who came, who raped, who pillaged, who murdered. Those names come from them, not just from rape, but from intermarriage or interacting with them. But it's a foreign name, in a foreign language
Yeah.
and a foreign religion.
Do you happen to remember? And again, we don't really know if it's true. All we have is information, and for us to judge if it's correct or not. But that when the Spanish came over, that there was a percentage or a portion of natives that got sick from
Oh,
them because they brought new, no sé si era bacteria or what do you know about that?
smallpox. They brought smallpox and they brought other diseases, but mainly it was smallpox that ravaged the indigenous people here. And por derecho, they might not like this either, pero era porque eran cochinos. They didn't, they didn't, and they're still to this day. They didn't have the
Hit that
hygiene.
like, gente.
They didn't have the hygiene that the natives here had.
It was a different time. It was a different era.
Yeah,
Who knows if back then they were showering once a week in the world, if or once a
yeah,
month in the world. Who knows
but
how hygiene was?
but the indigenous people had a better hygiene, but they hadn't been exposed to the smallpox and to the diseases that the Spaniard brought. Not just the Spaniard, but the American. They didn't have those. They had never had exposure to those diseases, so they didn't have immunity to them. So
So
when that smallpox ravaged the country, but do you know? And a lot of people don't know this because they start thinking that okay, it wiped out the Aztecs. It wiped out, because you're reading books where it tells you this, that there was pretty much eradicating it. Do you know Montezuma was a Tatoa at that time? Do you know his direct descendants are still here? I'm not talking about some Aztec blood that somebody might have. I'm talking about Montezuma's direct descendants. His great, 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 great grandsons are still here. They're still alive.
how do we know that?
In 2018, the descendant of Montezuma and the descendant of Hernan Cortez met in Mexico, and it was a gesture of reconciliation. And they met, and you can look this up. You can research this. You'll get a picture of them, both of them, the descendant of Montezuma and descendants of Hernan Cortez. They met and they're shaking hands. They're in Mexico City, right there in Mexico City, where their ancestors met and ended up fighting. Now, not only that, his one of his other great 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 grandsons is actually royalty in Spain. He's a duke in Spain because they took his great grandson to Mexico in the 1500s. They took Montezuma's great grandson, I mean, to Spain in the 1500s. They made him a prince at that time, but it turned over to now. It's he's a he's a duke, Duke de it's something Montezuma. It's the Montezuma. He actually has a royal title there in Spain to this day.
That's right. No, I believe you, brother. Mike's World right here says that's what killed 80% of indigenous people was a disease. That's a large percentage.
It's a very large percentage, and it did. It killed smallpox in their diseases killed more people than they killed with weapons.
So
Do you know?
you don't ever hear him talk about that.
Oh no, because do you know that in fighting, the Aztecs actually killed more Spaniards than Spaniards killed the Aztecs in actual fighting. Most of the people that were lost due to diseases. The majority of them that were lost. That's why they were devastated. That's why they couldn't fight back because they were busy fighting the disease. Not so much the Spaniards.
Imagine you're living, of course, your life, familias. It's normal life. Obviously, it's a different century, but it's normal life, and all of a sudden, people are just dropping like flies all around you, and there's funerals, and And I mean, in the movie, I remember like in the movie Apocalypto, when they're coming up to the shore. Let me ask you this: so when the Inquisition happened, did they hit first? As far as your knowledge go, that you know, did they hit first? They hit on this continent. Was it the Mexico? Is it down there, Central America? Where did they land? They didn't land in North America. Where did the Spanish land first on this
No,
continent?
they on this continent it was there in Mexico because like Christopher Columbus, he landed in the Caribbeans. He landed in the Caribbeans. But as far as this continent goes, yes, it was there on the peninsula right there by on Mexico. That's where Hernan Cortez landed, and he joined with indigenous because the Aztecs had conquered a lot of peoples around there. They had
Tribes, different tribes.
yeah, they've conquered quite a few, and they allowed them some form of autonomy, but they had to pay tribute to the Aztecs, and they were tired of it. So when Hernan Cortez came, they joined forces with some of the indigenous people to overthrow the Aztecs. But yeah, it was disease that really, that really devastated our people.
And then what happened after? It must have been so the immune system it got stronger because man, what Mike's
Eventually,
World said, that's a large percentage
yeah, and eventually those who didn't die, um, see,
adapted.
exactly, because a lot of people don't read the history and don't know the Aztecs were still fighting after that. They joined forces with the Spaniard to help conquer other indigenous people. Just like some indigenous people joined forces with the Spaniards to conquer the Aztecs, it was the same way afterwards. There's one note in history where 400 Aztec warriors joined the Spaniards to conquer another indigenous tribe. So they were actually still there. They was, and see, that's what I try to tell people is that the Spaniard did not eradicate us. Your history books did.
Hello. Hello. What you were saying about tribalism, right? I had heard a story saying that the one of the tribes, I forgot, with the Spanish, they ended up going to war against another tribe. And I'm thinking through my head, I'm like, they really trusted foreigners that much. Hey, help me. But all the foreigners were doing were plotting the
Yep,
overthrow and conquering because those were the years of like post crusades. O sea, it was about conquering, taking land. People were, like you said, colonizing. Like right now, Canada. How much percentage of Canada is French?
yep,
Why? Well, pues es que no los corrieron. You know, let's just keep it real. No los corrieron y agarraron la lengua.
yep. And there. I mean, it happened all through here, but it was our inability to put aside our differences and join together in unity to overthrow them that not only ended up defeating our own people, but the indigenous people in North America too. Their inability to join forces and fight. It wasn't until Tecumseh that they really started to join and try to fight. And they put up a hell of a fight then. But if they'd have joined forces earlier and united against the invader, against the colonizer, they would have stood a lot better chance. Just like the Aztecs or the Mexica down there in Mexico. But they weren't able to put aside their differences. They didn't see the invasion and the conquest as something that would encompass everyone. They only saw it as, like the saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Boom. That part right there. No, definitely. Yes, and then okay, so coming back to a former topic or something we started out, I think this is a question I ask everyone that comes on the canal, carnal, and I seem to get sometimes varying answers. So I want to ask waywardson360, and don't forget to follow him on social media. We've been posting this for 2 days, the comments and the questions. I'm gonna try to get to some, but we're gonna keep it respectful and keep it within an hour. Wayward carnal, what is your definition of the word Chicano?
Chicano, what I always tell everybody is this: the difference between a Mexican American and a Chicano is you can be born Mexican American. You cannot be born Chicano. Chicano is an understanding, it's a way of life, it's going back to your roots. I see videos of people, a little chavalon, 3 years old, calling him a little Chicano. He's a little Mexican American. He ain't Chicano. Chicano is an awareness of who you are, your ancestral roots. If you go back to the Chicano movements, you'll see that a lot of Chicanos started speaking Nahuatl. They started taking on Aztecs names and denying their slave name. The Lopez, the Gonzalez, the Hernandez started denying that. If you go back into the real Chicano movement, I'm talking about from the late 60s and early 70s, if you go into that history, you'll see that they all started gravitating more towards, the Aztec. They took on the Aztec, even though there's more than just the Aztec. There's 68 different indigenous tribes down there in Mexico. But the Aztec um, became like a symbol of all Mexicans at that time. And they were gravitating towards that. A lot of the people that I started learning from, they spoke Nahuatl. We used to take classes. We used to sit there and read, and speak to each other in Nahuatl. We used to take on, there's a calendar. You know that you can still, today, you can still take your Aztec name, the name that you would have been called back then, the
No,
exact,
really?
the exact same name that you would have been called in Nahuatl. You can still find that name today because the Aztecs had two different names. You had your calendar name and you had your personal name. Personal name is like a nickname. Like you hear Native Americans here calling themselves Running Bear or something like that.
Right.
That's the same thing. It's a personal name. That name could have been given to you by, by your elders. It's something you could have taken on yourself. Let's say you identify with a certain animal or a certain trait within yourself, humbleness or pride. You can take on a personal name, but your Aztec name, the Aztec name that you were born with, that name relies on the year you were born, the month you were born, and the day you were born. There's a word for each day, each year, each month. The day you was born, the year and the month translates into your name. Three different words translates into your Aztec name. All you have to do is take the date of birth that you have now and transfer that over to the Aztec calendar because there's a difference there. You can't just take it by your birthday to this calendar. You have to transfer it back to the Aztec calendar. Once you do that, you read the name because it'll be like one read, three bear, something like that, and you just translate that back, and you can actually take on your own Aztec name.
That's crazy. My brother, real quick question. Have you ever read a book called American Holocaust?
I just somebody just recommended that book, but no, I've got it on order because somebody just sent me that link to purchase that book about 2 weeks ago.
Okay, okay. That was a good one. That was in the comment section. Yeah, you're blowing me away. Now I'm like, I need the link. I need the link to that website. How do I get the Aztec calendar? How do I even know? Is there like an ancestry DNA? How do I know what tribe of the 68 the portion of me that is
Okay,
indigenous comes from?
a lot of people don't. I'm going to show you something. This is mine. This is my DNA plus my family tree. Now, along your family tree, you have to understand that there's a lot of things that go into um, doing your family tree. And what they're doing is they're going to go by census records, birth certificates, legal documents, and everything. As long as you have your mother and your father's names, your mom's maiden name, their birthday. It'd be good if you had your grandparents' name, maiden name, and birthdays as well, because there's people that do this for a living. There's people and companies that trace your family tree, your lineage for a living. And in some of those documents, not all, not everybody's going to be able to trace back or chase down their actual lineage. Not everybody can, but for some people, it's there waiting for you. And when I did mine on two places on my father's side, it read Zapoteca, and in one place on my mother's side was Zapoteca, and then Nahuatl. So I'm both Nahuatl and Zapoteca on my mother's side, and Zapoteca on my father's side.
Okay, but what I guess what I want to clarify, there's actually you mentioned something that I've heard your view of it, and then I've heard the contrary view of it. Is this based on what lineage? Mothers or fathers? Or you're saying the more information the merrier, or which lineage is the one
No,
this is based on?
your lineage comes from your mother. So as I mentioned earlier, only the woman can pass down mitochondrial DNA. Your lineage comes through mitochondrial DNA that only your mother can pass down. Now, you'll have DNA from your father, which mine was Zapoteca, but your lineage comes from your mother, which the higher percentage of mine was Nahuatl. And but also there was Zapoteca there too. But it comes from your mother's side. So you can, I mean, that's the definition of it. That we can believe what we want to believe, but see, that's the whole thing. People are going to gravitate to whatever they. That's why this flag that I have here,
Yeah.
if you see, it's the Mexican flag, but beneath that is an indigenous Aztec warrior. Because see, that's the thing that happens with most people of mixed blood. They gravitate to or identify with one side of their existence at the expense of the other. And for us to this point, or at least for me, it has always been the Spanish side, the speaking Spanish, the Garcia Lopez last name, the Catholicism. We've always gravitated to that because that's all we've been taught. That's all we've been, that's always, it's
Right.
always there at the table. And
Right.
it isn't until you start investigating and start, rooting around that you find that you're more than that. There's more that makes up that whole. So yeah, it's the mother side where the lineage comes from, and you can trace that. But on my mother's side, I've been able to trace my mother's side back to, I think it's 1820. My father's side, I've been able to trace back to 1745.
Because I've heard the opposite view saying you are the seed of your father. And it seemed like they were putting all the weight what you're doing. There's been a lot of people that actually have heard what I just said right now, that message, the father seed. And there's other people that are like, man, nomás tenía la mamá mexicana, but maybe the dad was the Central American or something like that. Shout out to, or from another country. So your definition of Chicano. Oh, let me ask you this then. We're in the identity crisis generation. People don't know what I believe when you have to identify as something, it's because you're not 100% solid que soy. So I have to, it's kind of like I picture como un animal, like say if it was a chicken and if the chicken could talk and say, I'm a lion, I'm a lion. All the other animals would be like pendejo, you're a chicken, right? But we're in a different generation right now that says, no, I identify as this and identify as that. Can anyone identify as a Chicano?
I
Or
think
is there certain, or because it's an ideology or something floating in the air, or you got vatos in Japan who are low riding that might call
yeah,
themselves Chicano? What
yeah.
what do you think about that?
No, I think that under the true definition, now everybody can call themselves whatever they want to. Nowadays you can. Everything's up for grabs. But by the true definition that comes out of the Chicano movement, it's an awareness. And until you gain that awareness, until you gain that understanding, until you practice that way of life, then I wouldn't call myself a Chicano. Now, other people might think otherwise, but that's because they don't know the history and they weren't part of the movement and don't understand what it actually means to be Chicano. Today, Chicano has morphed into lowriders and rucas and dressing cholo. That's what people look at Chicano today. Oh, he's Chicano because he dresses cholo, and because that's not what it was. It might be what it's evolved into, but that's not what it was. Not for the OGs. So people that actually know the history, that actually have that understanding, Chicano isn't just about your ramfla. That came from the movement because the Chicano movement, like I said, it was an identity crisis. It was anti-assimilation. So we started pulling away from the norm. Everything we started changing. We wanted something for us, something for that we were part of, that we can look at and call home, that we can say that was ours, that's us, and that's where that evolved into. So yeah, the ramplas, that's part of it, but that came from it. That isn't the root of it. Those are the leaves on the trees. It's not the root of that tree.
That's right. That's right. So as far as who are some of the key players in the Chicano movement, or what kind of events sparked this off? I know, kind of for like in the African American negro, whatever you want to say, black community, Martin Luther King era uno that is a very prominent name. A lot of people called MLK a prophet because a prophet is, I believe, is someone that comes with a different message that's never been heard before and not accepted. and then obviously things fall into place and things come to pass. Was there any key players that you would say is on the Mount Rushmore of the Chicano movement, that if you're Chicano, you should know these names? Si no, ni digas la palabra Chicano.
The main one that everybody knows, but it's controversial, is Cesar Chavez. And the reason it's controversial is because Cesar Chavez himself called Mexicans from Mexico wetbacks. And
Chingado.
now, see, this is it's that's why it's controversial, because he did for. I'm not going to take away from what Cesar Chavez did. He did for the people. He stood up for migrant workers, for people out in the filas. But and I understand why he had that animosity towards people from Mexico, was because he was trying to get people from here in the Estados Unidos to strike, but then you had people from Mexico that were coming over. Porque what a lot of people don't understand, there are people that come from less. No matter how poor you think you are here in the Estados Unidos, there's other people that come from less. So they're coming to see what you already have. So a lot of the Mexicanos started coming over, and they were thinking, you know what, he would look at them like strike breakers. They were taking his job, and not only taking their jobs, but taking away taking away their stance, taking away the foundation on which they were building. Because without them being able to, the power to unite and strike against against the farm, everybody that was in control of the farms and things like that, then they had no power. And so he called them wetbacks, and he's the main one. And I understand, but at the what he did and why he did it, but at the same time, it's like, how are you going to put that division? How are you going to, you're putting the same border that the Estados Unidos put. You're taking that, you're drawing that line and differentiating us from them. You're saying we're not the same as them. But, and I challenge anybody here that calls themselves Mexicano to go through their family tree. And guess what? Somewhere back in that family tree, it might be your grandfather, your great grandfather, your great 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 grandfather. Somebody in your family tree was that wetback.
Híjole. I know they don't want to hear that. He was probably the number one person on that Mount Rushmore, if you had to name a couple. And he had very controversial. Well, maybe he was thinking of the Raza's interest only in North America because they're
Yeah,
here already. They didn't have to worry about documentation because by birthright, ya nacieron aquí, like I did. I'm first generation Mexican American. And so there, but I even heard that he led a group of, was it like Minutemen, to go and actually assist over at the border and try to control the border crisis that's been going on for decades and decades and decades. And now it's just turned into a political pond where it's just every 4 years they'll mention someone will mention they'll fix it, but then it doesn't happen. But do you remember him leading a pack of people over there that were actually watching the border? And here are the Raza against the Raza, or how does all that play out?
down there in Califas, yeah, he was actually, because he said that they were illegal immigrants, and there was no letting them in like that, not through proper channels, was undermining the people that were already here. So yeah, he was building up groups to stop that because he didn't want that happening. Now, like I said, it's really controversial, and I understand his reasoning. And don't get me wrong, I understand his reasoning, but he allowed he allowed that, you know that animosity to get into the movement, to where we started looking at us as, we're different from them, we're not the same people, our struggle is different from theirs. And that separation happened there, and the separation was solidified to where after that, yeah, we started looking at them sideways, and they're looking at us the same way. A lot of pleito resulted from that between Chicanos and Mexicanos in Mexico.
And a lot of people say that also it was, could have been, he could have just been a pawn on the chessboard being used for political reasons. Hey, we need the Raza's vote. Hey, this guy is unionizing and getting the Raza together, but hey, let's make sure he's falling into our ideologies. Some people say that there was a lot of persuasion around him. I don't know, but I've heard those things. So, and the Chicano movement, the moratorium that happened in LA. Do you know anything about the background to that? How that happened? What was it that took place? Was it an uprising? Was it a riot that Chicanos just got fed up with? And I haven't researched that one too myself, so I'm interested if you know anything about the moratorium and how all that came about and what happened.
It was a lot of the things that was happening because it started not just from there. It was a build up to it, from the Zoot Suit riots to to people being you know killed by police, and just the whole suppression of us and the right, our ability to vote. Because at the same time, we always see history and the civil rights movement through black and white eyes. It was either black or white. That's all you hear. Black and white, black and white. You don't hear that brown side of the story. But the same thing that they was going through was the same thing we was going through. There was a period in time where more Mexicans were lynched in Texas than African Americans. More Mexicans were lynched between 1910 and 1920, and right after the Mexican American War. More Mexicans were lynched than African Americans.
And
Mexicans were suffering. Mexicans were being killed because down here in Texas, that's one of the videos that I put up that they took down. Down here in Texas, it was open season on Mexicans. That you could kill a Mexican like you could kill a dog. You suffered no consequences, and that's just what was going on. But finally, Mexicans started coming together and said, "That's enough, man. We need to do something. We have the power. We have the numbers. We need to join, and we need to all start voting as a block." Because once they seen that we have, the power to take you in or to put you in or take you out, then they'll start listening to us. And
yeah,
he pushed that movement because of what was going on in the filas and how they were exploiting the workers, paying them pennies, working a day for $2-3. He's seen that, and he stood up against that. He united when he formed the United Farm Workers Union. He got people together. There was just so many different things. It wasn't just one. There were so many different things that came into play that pushed that movement.
orale. And obviously, it looked like it was this took place, I think, in Los Angeles
Yeah,
also as well. Which I mean, Los Angeles might as well. I think Los Angeles might be Chicano headquarters. I mean, as
yeah,
far as one city is concerned, because of the population over there. I'm in a city. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. I'm in a city more in Central California. It's called Salinas,
yeah.
and we're on the corrida. So we have a UFW here headquarters and a lot of history here con museos que tienen fotos of Cesar Chavez because we're one of the few cities that have a UFW headquarters because Cesar marched all through here because here it looks like we're the most north the corrida goes is Salinas, which is the equator of California. And then it goes south, right? Obviously all the way to Yuma. And that connection keeps going back every single temporada. But man, what you were saying right there is a lot of people, okay, that 1910s and 1920s is kind of like the dark days because off the radar, nothing electronic, nothing being recorded, things happen, but people hear you talking about these things and they think, does Wayward Son have a chip on his shoulder for the Estados Unidos?
And well, here's the thing. It's not so much a chip on my shoulder, but you can't call it that because here's the thing. When you can justify the subjugation and colonization of a people, when you and the continued colonization, because colonization hasn't ended. It exists today. But all I'm teaching is the history of that colonization. Now, people don't want to hear the history. They want, but see, what I try to tell people is this, and to understand where I'm coming from. Today, you have the right to vote. Today, you have the freedom of speech. Today, you have the right to bear arms. You have all of these things, but your great 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 grandparents didn't. Everything that you got today, all your rights, all your privileges, all your freedoms, they weren't given to you by the United States. They were fought for. They were bought and paid for by the blood, sweat, and tears of those that came before you. And the United States fought us every step of the way. The Chicano movement, the civil rights movement, Brown versus Board of Education, all of these things, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all of these things had to happen in order to get where we're getting here. And all I'm doing is saying that we should appreciate the blood that was shed by our people that fought for these things so that you could have them, so that you could wake up today and criticize somebody that speaks on that history, that tells that story because you feel a special kind of way about the life that you've grown up in. But I'm just here to remind you that the America that you woke up in today isn't the same America that your ancestors woke up to. We had to fight for that. And that's all I'm saying with my content.
That's right. I saw a meme, and it was like some Indians ahí, and they were looking at a little pinche un grupecito of like carriages and horses, and they look like pues americanos, I guess, and they were like something, I can't remember the words, but they were like, it's okay, we're pro immigration or something, something, something. O sea, it was one of these Chicano pages that I follow, like Espiritu Chicano, Chicano memes, and all these other ones, that are interesting, and at least will make you think. I feel, hermano, that I have to pass this on to my children. I can't just turn my back on Mexico and my cultura, or they'll never know anything that has to do with the cultura. Here comes October. Every October, I set up right here a beautiful altar. O sea, de Dia de Muertos. It's going to be all right here con colores de Mexico, and my beautiful wife helps me with that. O sea, I keep that going, but a lot of people get it twisted when you tell them some of the facts that you told them that has to do with history. Hey, that was a different time. Okay, it's thinking. Some people say right now, hermano, that they wanted to go back to that, as if we can right now in the 21st century go back to some kind of temple living. And because I've seen some people go extreme and decolonize, but to the point that they want everyone in leather chanclas again. And I was like, wait a second. Wait. That's not where we're at.
No. And that's let me tell you one thing. Because you just mentioned Dia de los Muertos. That's not Mexican, that's indigenous, right?
Come on, let me know.
Dia de los Muertos came before that. If you look up on the history of Dia de los Muertos, the Mayans practiced Dia de los Muertos before colonization, before the first Spaniard set foot on this land, before the first white man set foot on this land. Things like that, El Mal de Ojo, where they use the egg to take away the mal de ojo, that's indigenous also. There's a lot of practices that we practice today that we think of as Mexican, but that aren't Mexican, just like the foods we eat, tamales, pozole, atole, all of those things. Those are indigenous. And that's all I'm saying with this video. There's a lot more to you, a lot more to me, a lot more to people listening than we've been led to believe. There's a lot more to us. We have a rich and beautiful, we have also a tragic history, but we have a rich and beautiful history. And all I'm doing is speaking on that history. All I want people to know and to understand is that people suffered so that you could live the way you live, for the opportunities that you have today. You know that you weren't even considered a United States citizen until 1845. There
Come
was
on
no
now.
Mexican American citizens until after the Spanish American War. There was no until the Mexican United States War. There was no Mexican citizens until that time.
At that time, you think they saw us worthy? Okay, let's give these people. They keep going to war for us, keep giving their lives for us, or was it just the evolution was rolling where immigration was just starting to get normal, but we were still centuries away?
Well, it was part of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. After the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, after the Mexican American War, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo granted those who were on this side when the border was made, granted them citizenship. That's when the Mexicans became citizens of the United States, when the United States won the Mexican American War. Before that, you weren't a U.S. citizen. And but what I'm saying is that you didn't have the rights and protections of a U.S. citizen. Even those who after that were called U.S. citizens, during the Mexican repartition, they were sending U.S. citizens, Mexicans born and raised here in the United States, back to Mexico. people that were born and raised here in the United States, that were citizens of the United States, they sent them back to Mexico too.
All the work they did, all the sweat, labor, and I had heard that they were, of course, there was segregation. Let's just keep it real. There was segregation. That the raza was like sleeping under trees, o sea, árboles and carpas and tents, and they couldn't go into neighborhoods that would be considered middle class or the suburbs. But again, it was a different time. A lot of people see your videos, which I'm sure after this video, everyone's gonna go over to his social media. Just type in Wayward Son 360. I asked him about the name as well, and you got to go back to the beginning of the video to find that out. But my brother, that information right there is priceless. And again, here the pillars: Dios, cultura, familia, is something that I push. There's another generation coming up right now that says no sabo, no sabo. That's gonna be the generation that is gonna drop the baton. Take my word for it. In about 20 years or 30 years, it's a whole different landscape. And I'm glad at least I got to experience, o sea, Dios. I say this at the end of every video. I say, in the end, all we have is the memories. And so people take that in consideration, because I think it's all going to flash and we got to make as many as we can. But I'm glad I got the knowledge that I got. I got to grow up in Mexico, walking down those cobblestone roads in Michoacan, where they have aguacates as big as footballs. Okay. I would catch them on a crate, and then my dad or uncle was a mile high in the sky. And uno de esos cabrones me pegó en la cara una vez, and I was crying like a baby. Or going to Jalisco, but now Jalisco is a lot more modern. But noticing acá hay un chingo de güeros, and almost more than I thought in the United States. And I didn't know, because I was just taught the educational system, what we're talking about right now, Spanish, the blood. But what you're saying is, and a lot of the people missed it right now, is a lot of us Chicanos that have the old English names blasted on their backs, we have foreign names that don't even belong to us.
Exactly. It's a slave name for all intents and purposes. And I don't, like you was
A
mentioning,
slave name, he said. A slave name.
I don't, it's not because
That's a hard word.
there's a lot of Chicanos that are, they're proud of, being American. They're proud of being born and raised here. And I'm not saying to turn your back on that. I'm not saying you have to, because that's a nationality. You're born and raised here. You're pursuing your dreams here. There are plenty of opportunities if you're willing to put in the work. There are plenty of opportunities here in the Estados Unidos to come up. I own my own business. There are
Órale.
plenty of opportunities to come up. Take advantage of every single one of them. All I'm saying with my content is, remember who you are, remember who you came from, remember the sacrifices, because these sacrifices weren't just made by somebody out there in the wilderness. These sacrifices were made by your ancestors too. Your father, your great grandfather, they went through the struggle, they went through the fire. Your great great grandfather, they went through the fire, and they made it to this point. And all I'm saying is, don't forget those who came before you, because the house that you live in now, the foundation of that house was built by the blood, sweat, and tears of those who came before you.
I guess that's a great way to end it, mi hermano. I was talking about this new generation that it looks like they want nothing to do with the history or the heritage. They're more in the live in the now generate. I do also work. I go down. I have 2 meetings every month. I go down the juvenile hall once a month, and then there's a camp, and that's where they send like the serious offenders. Again, all these are minors. And I see this generation, you know what I mean? It just seems like there's no limits, and the disrespect, and as far as the culture goes, they kind of want nothing to do with it. Aquí estamos en Estados Unidos. I feel the obligation to keep that alive through my children, and so does my wife. We're on the same page about that. It's not going to be us that's going to let it go. Tengo dos patrias, and I love and embrace both of them, and I will be proud of both of them. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. Is there any last words that you want to say, hermano?
Just like what you said about the cultura, man, pick it up, man. Just not only the Mexican culture, but your indigenous culture. At least seek that out and understand that there's more to you than meets the eye. So pick up those little pieces, whatever piece of puzzle you can pick up, pick it up, man. That's yours. That's your history. pick it up and hold that, hold it to your heart, man. Hold it dear, because that's you, man. There's more to you than meets the eye.
That's right. No, I appreciate you. Ben Davis says it's funny. It looks like more people identify and are proud and push the Mexican indigenous, but how come it's not normal? Or how come people aren't really pushing the Spaniard side of that? Is that because they came and they pillaged?
Yeah,
Is it because they have the rap of pillaging, taking over the diseases, and I don't want to disrespect anyone from Spain. I surely know I have Spanish blood inside of me. No soy tonto. I mean,
no, I have 30% Spanish blood, but I know that came from the colonizer. So to ask me to recognize and sort of pay homage to that Spanish blood is the equivalent of asking the son of a woman who was raped to honor thy father.
and we'll end it on that note. If you want to see a part two, I have a feeling I'm gonna be getting messages, hermano. They might be wanting to see a part two on this, but at least go over to the social media, primarily TikTok, the videos that have 2 million, 4 million, and more. And the hermano's so humble right here. He says he takes a break from trabajo, uploads it, doesn't know until the phone says 1K notifications.
Yeah, that's exactly how it happens, man.
Nah, I appreciate you, Canal. All right, everyone in the comment section, appreciate you guys. We'll be back on Sunday night. Have a blessed weekend. I appreciate Wayward Son 360 is in the house, man. Gracias, hermano. And remember what I always say to everyone. Remember what I always say. In the end, all you got is the memories.
Thank you. Gracias.
A ti.